My guest now on Your Peterborough is Ben Inglis, and Ben is a pastor with Hill City Baptist Church here in Peterborough, and is also one of the co-organizers of a planned protest that is set for the Saturday, January 14th at the Peterborough Public Library, where at the same time, drag queen story time will be held at the library for children aged 3 to 8 years old. Welcome, Ben. So glad you could join us today. Want to get a perspective, and certainly, I know you have opinions on this, on this particular event, and in particular, how that has prompted you and others to protest. Where is the concern coming from?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Paul. I appreciate this opportunity. So I was thinking about this, and you can kind of separate, I guess, the tiers of the protest into two main components. So you have kind of the organizers at the center, me and Paul, and kind of a few others, you kind of have, I'm not going to call them a fringe element, but people who kind of attach themselves to the protest because they're genuinely concerned and upset and want to have a voice, but they wouldn't necessarily be aligned with us on all of the things that maybe the principles that we hold. So as far as what would kind of generally unite everyone coming to the protest would be the conviction that drag cultures, drag entertainers, put very simply, shouldn't be within 100 miles of kids. We've talked in our other interview about how drag is inherently a movement and expression designed to normalize transgressive sexuality. That's what it has always been. That's what it remains. The fact that it's kind of been pushed into mainstream thought and activity doesn't change that fact. So we are gathering to say that's unacceptable, that's inappropriate, it's actually just wrong. And that's something we really want to convey. This isn't something we sat down in a strategy meeting and kind of calculated our chances of success. How many protesters will there be? How many counter protesters will there be? Will we be able to gain influence, in some way? No, we are assembling in protest as a principled objection. We believe that Drag Story Hour is objectively wrong. And the fact that this is, again, we've talked before how many of the components of drag are hypersexualized. The names, the costumes, the mannerisms, the expressions, it's all meant to kind of desensitize viewers to this, again, what I would say a transgressive sexuality. So that would be the main thing that unites all of us, kind of closer to the core in the center. Going a bit deeper, we actually affirm that the idea, the concept, the notion of gender fluidity is a lie and is false. We are Christians. I am a pastor. I have to include this. We believe that God created us male and female. And those aren't simply cultural constructs that, we can kind of take apart and relegate to history. That's a thing. That binary, male and female, is woven into the fabric of the world that we live in. So that would kind of, going a little deeper, unite kind of the core of where we're coming from, to communicate to very young kids, that 2-year-old kids, this is being aimed at. You may not be male or female, little Johnny, little Susan. I mean, your biology, your objective biology may be lying to you. There's actually a whole world of self-expression you can open yourself. that's profoundly destabilizing for a young mind who doesn't even know what's happening. They don't even have the mental faculties to be able to ascertain if that's really true or not, especially when an adult is telling you this, right?
There was a similar event held at the library last September. According to the library, not Betty, it was one of the best attended, if not best attended, story times that they've had at the library in recent memory. So the point I'm trying to get at is there are a fair number of people, as you'd expect, who don't share your view or your group's view, but yet I sense that your group at the same time represents I don't know if it's a silent majority, but certainly a lot more people than we're going to see out in front of the library. Would that be your assessment too?
Yes, yeah, that would be my assessment. And the unfortunate, I guess you could say, unfortunate thing about the silent majority is they haven't been trained and weaponized towards activism in the same way that kind of my generation and the next generation has been. You know, a lot of the silent majority isn't interested in protest. They're not interested in challenging normal. They like normal. In fact, normal, and by normal, I'm speaking of traditional marriage, you know, traditional gender roles, traditional, and by traditional, I mean biblical, that's where they come from. Those things have been the center of why the West has flourished for as long as it's been a nation. You know, those things have been the cornerstone of healthy society. And you have this progressive element coming in and saying normal is bad. Okay, we want to destabilize everything, and we want to challenge all those traditional things. And they think perhaps that it's going to lead to this, I don't know, future of utopian love and brotherhood, which is not the case. It's going to lead to despair and death. But yes, there is a silent majority who's not okay with this, and I realize that that's anecdotal. But we saw, even for example, you know, the Freedom Convoy. If you're reading the news, if you're reading mainstream media, which is predominantly leftist, I would say, I don't think you can argue that. You would think that there's no one who thinks like this. And yet with the opportunity comes to protest, there's actually a ton of people. Now, we're a small city, you know, there's going to be less of us, but again, we don't determine truth. We believe is not an individual thing that we kind of find for ourselves. We believe that truth is an objective reality. Mm-hmm. And it behooves us as adults, as parents, as concerned citizens, when a certain threshold is crossed. We believe this Draq story is one of those thresholds. It's our responsibility to show up and say, look, this isn't right. And whether or not there's many of us or few of us, that doesn't change the rightness or wrongness of this. Mm-hmm. There's kind of been this determination, this push to kind of normalize increasingly aberrant forms of sexuality. And the accusation, people get all bent out of shape when we say these are grooming situations, right? That's often, you know, how dare you say that? But the burden of proof is on our opponents to defend. The burden of proof is on them to defend why that isn't the case. 10 years ago, the position that we have would not have been a controversial position. That Draq story hour doesn't belong in a kid's story hour, doesn't belong in a kid's room. That wouldn't have been controversial, and yet here we are. So they have to explain to us why this isn't a slippery slope. If the point of Draq is to normalize transgressive sexuality, what's to stop pedophilia, which is another form of transgressive sexuality, from being moved closer to the center? That's the nature of normalization and desensitization.
I've chatted with Betty before, and she has said, and will no doubt say on today's program, that the themes at the center of her presentation involve inclusion, which is important for kids, feeling included. And that's one of the main themes, but there are others, acceptance and that sort of thing. I know what your group is protesting, and I understand that, but I want to make it clear, or maybe you could make it clear for us, that you're not necessarily against those particular themes. It's just who's delivering them, I guess.
Yeah, and again, I mean, as a bare definition, inclusion and acceptance are words in the English vocabulary that, of course, we would affirm. The problem is there's this whole vocabulary that has almost been shanghaied. It's got so much baggage. When you say something, it's not just that definition, it's a whole narrative surrounding, right? So while we are not against inclusion, we are, as I've said, here for truth. And truth is by its nature exclusatory. If we believe something is right, if something is right, then its opposite is wrong and necessarily exclusive. If we're saying that drag story hour, is wrong in itself, then that would exclude everyone who wants to say that it's right. So we in our culture, in the present moment of history, we've kind of start to accept all these contradictions together. We're all kind of we all kind of think the same. We all want love and we all want inclusion. But the reality is that if one thing is right, the other thing has to be wrong. Black and white. I mean, it's just the nature of reality.
Ben, let's take some time just to, before we close out, just to really look at the protest on Saturday and kind of what you expect will happen, what you hope will happen. And I also make the point that there are some concerns around, protests in the past have become particularly, I don't want to say violent, but certainly aggressive. The library has expressed some concern, as they should. They have to look after their patrons and everybody that's there, including protesters. I understand from talking to you earlier that you're taking great pains to make sure this is peaceful and but gets the point across. But give us an idea of what's going to be happening on Saturday.
Yeah, so it really is unfortunate that the only form of dialogue and expression we have, especially I would say those who aren't on board with the progressive left, is protest. Again, I was mentioning earlier, the media is monolithic in its acceptance, approval, celebration of kind of what I would say the left liberal narrative. So we don't actually have really any avenues for expression. Protests are not the ideal medium for reasonable, rational conversation. The nature of them, there's people, the tensions are high, emotions are high, and it's hard to just have a reasonable conversation. So that is the reality of the protest. The other reality of a protest is that you can't curate everyone who's going to show up. I mean, that would be great. We could send out little handwritten gold embossed invitations and say, please come to our protest. But that's not the reality, especially with social media, things get shared, people pick up on it. People are genuinely upset and they want to say something, so they show up. So as far as we're concerned, Paul and I, we've done our best to say over and over again, look, this is peaceful. We're here, a lot of us are just going to be holding signs. I'm hoping to talk for maybe a minute. We're going to sing together. But and last time there was actually some good conversations had. And and I hope that can happen. I hope the island of dialogue hasn't shrunk to the point where we can't have a reasonable discussion, even if we're on polar opposites of things, right? So we're going to show up and be there as a peaceful but poignant articulation of why we believe this is wrong. We're not doing this because we hate anyone. We certainly don't hate anyone. That's a convenient narrative to have. If you think someone's hateful, you don't have to engage with their arguments at all. We're not hateful. We actually care about our community. I grew up going to the library. I love the library. I think it's tragic that adults who should know better are encouraging this kind of thing to take place. And I think they should be ashamed of themselves. But we actually deeply care for our community. And that's why we're here. If we didn't, it'd be easier to stay home, because who wants to go to a protest, right?
Absolutely. Well, Ben, before I let you go, I should mention that Paul you refer to is Paul Lawton, who is the co-organizer of the protest.
Yes.
So people know. Thank you so much for doing this. As I mentioned, we are going to have Betty on and we're going to hear her views. It should be interesting. But I am delighted you were able to share your group's views today on this. A reminder to our viewers that protest is on Saturday. Story hour, I believe, is 10:15 a.m. And you guys will be out at the library. And I take it anyone is invited to join you.
Anyone is welcome. Leave your Molotov cocktails at home, though, please.
Ben Inglis, pastor with Hill City Baptist Church. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for this opportunity.